The first shot wasn't a warning. It was a promise. 1 second, the Arizona sun was cooking the world into a silent, shimmering haze. The next, the air itself cracked open, a sound so loud it felt like the sky was tearing apart. My horse screamed, a sound I'd never heard it make, and reared up, all muscle and terror. I clung to the saddle horn, my heart trying to beat its way right out of my ribs. Everything turned to chaos. Gunfire, not just one rifle but a dozen, echoed off the canyon walls, turning the air into a hornet's nest of lead. Men were shouting, my father, Major Langston, his voice a raw bark of command, and other shouts. Cries, really. War cries that clawed at my soul. My horse, bless its terrified heart, bolted. It scrambled sideways, hooves finding no purchase on the loose rock. I saw Mr. Kearney, the company draftsman, just fall. He folded over in his saddle like a child's doll, a dark flower blooming on the front of his shirt. It didn't look real. None of it looked real. The soldiers were trying to form a line, trying to bring order to the madness. But it was too late. They were already here. They came from the rocks above, pouring down the canyon walls like shadows given life. They moved with a speed that was unnatural, silent and deadly. Arrows, black streaks against the golden sun, thudded into men and horses. Another soldier went down, then another. Through the smoke and the blinding sun, a single rider broke free. He was bare-chested, his skin the color of the earth itself, streaked with ash and ochre. His hair was a black river flowing behind him, and his eyes. They found mine. Across the chaos, across the screaming and the dying, his eyes locked onto me, and he came for me. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the small pistol in my saddlebag. It was a toy, really, a lady's accessory my father insisted I carry. But now it was the only thing in the world I wanted. I couldn't get a grip. My hands were shaking too hard. Before I could even raise it, he was there. His horse, a powerful beast of black and white, slammed into mine. The impact sent a shockwave through my bones. I was thrown, tumbling from the saddle, the world spinning in a blur of dust and sky. I hit the ground hard. The air left my lungs in a single ragged gasp. When I blinked the dust from my eyes, he was standing over me. His shadow was a cool blanket in the searing heat. I tried to scramble backward, my boots digging uselessly into the sand. He wasn't looking at me with hatred. It was something else, something colder, resolute. "Get away from her!" My father's voice, strained and cracking. The warrior didn't even flinch. He knelt, his movements fluid and certain, and his hand closed around my wrist. It wasn't rough, but it was absolute. An iron grip that said, "You are mine." With a single, effortless motion, he pulled me to my feet. "No!" my father roared. "Let her go, you savage!" The warrior didn't speak. Not at first. He just held me there, a shield between him and the remaining soldiers. The gunfire had slowed, then stopped. The canyon was suddenly, terrifyingly silent. The attackers held the high ground, their arrows and rifles aimed down at every single one of my father's men. Then the man holding me spoke, and the sound of his voice sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. It was calm, precise, and his English was perfect. "Tell your men to stand down," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "Or she dies." My father's face was a mask of purple rage. "You have no right." The warrior's grip tightened just a fraction. He pulled me closer, his chest hard against my back. "No more tricks, Major," he said, and the way he said my father's title made it sound like an insult. "No more lies. You bring your daughter out here as a blessing for your iron road, a pretty face to smile while you dig up our graves. So now she will be your penance." He didn't wait for a reply. He hoisted me onto his horse as if I weighed nothing, swinging up behind me in a single motion. His arms locked around me, a cage of muscle and resolve. He kicked the horse hard. We shot forward, a blur of motion and dust. I screamed, thrashing against him, but it was like struggling against a stone wall. Behind us, the gunfire erupted again. I heard my father bellow my name, a sound of pure agony. Then, sickeningly, Corporal Ellis, his voice cracking with panic, shouted it too. But the canyon was already swallowing the sounds, swallowing my past. We rode hard, straight into the setting sun, away from the bodies, away from the fort, away from every single thing I had ever known. And as we galloped into the unknown, one thought hammered in my head, a terrifying question that drowned out everything else. How did he know who I was? How did he know my father's name? This wasn't a random attack. This was personal. And I was right in the middle of it. We rode until the world turned from orange to purple to a deep star-dusted black. I'd stopped struggling an hour ago. Exhaustion was a heavy blanket, and the futility of it all was a cold, hard stone in my gut. My back was pressed against his chest, my hands pinned to the saddle horn. He rode like he was part of the horse, a single creature of purpose moving through the unforgiving landscape. There was no sound but the rhythmic pounding of hooves, the whisper of the wind, and the steady, calm sound of his breathing right behind my ear. It wasn't the breathing of a man exerting himself. It was the breathing of a man who was completely, utterly in his element. He was home, and I had never been more lost. Just as the moon, a pale sliver of bone, began to rise, he did something I didn't expect. He slowed the horse, not abruptly, but with a gentle pressure, guiding it into a narrow, hidden cut between two massive rock formations. The temperature dropped instantly. The air grew still. He was scanning the darkness, listening. I held my breath, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing, then a faint sound, the clatter of a loose stone. It was far off, but it was there. Someone was following us. I felt his body tense. He wasn't just running, he was being hunted. But who was hunting the hunter? He nudged the horse forward again, but this time, the pace was different, slower, quieter. He was picking his way through a maze of stone and shadow, his senses on a razor's edge. Finally, he pulled the horse to a stop under a massive overhang of rock that blotted out the stars. He dismounted in a single silent movement. I braced myself, expecting to be dragged down, but he reached up and lifted me from the saddle like I was a child. He set me on my feet, his hands steadying me when my legs threatened to buckle. "You need water," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. It was the first time he'd spoken to me since the canyon. He offered me a canteen. I hesitated, my eyes trying to read his face in the gloom. He wasn't a monster, not the kind from my father's stories. His features were sharp, carved from the rock around us. A thin scar traced a path from his temple to the corner of his mouth, a white line in the moonlight. "Drink," he said again, his voice a little softer this time. I took the canteen with shaking hands. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever felt. I drank until my throat stopped aching. I looked back the way we came, half hoping to see the glint of cavalry sabers, a foolish, childish wish. There was only darkness. "Who's out there?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. He was loosening the saddle, checking the horse's legs with an expert's touch. "Not your father's men," he said finally. "They ride with too much noise. These are different." My blood ran cold. "Who are they?" He looked up and his eyes seemed to glow in the dark. The kind of men the railroad hires when they want a job done quietly. The kind who don't leave witnesses. The implication hit me like a physical blow. They weren't chasing him. They were chasing us. But why? "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He moved to a flat rock and sat, pulling a strip of jerky from his bag. He didn't offer me any. "Your father made a deal," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "A deal to clear the land. But he promised more than just empty ground. He promised things buried in the ground." He paused, letting the words hang in the cold air. "Things that belonged to my ancestors. Things his employers are very eager to collect." It all started to click into place. A horrible, sickening puzzle. Mr. Kearney, the draftsman, always scribbling in his little notebooks. The extra crates packed with surveying equipment that were guarded day and night. The hushed, angry conversations I'd overheard between my father and a man in a fine suit who visited the fort last month. My father wasn't building a railroad. He was robbing graves. And Mr. Kearney wasn't just a draftsman. He was the cataloger. His death wasn't a random casualty of an attack. He was silenced. "They think I know something," I breathed, the realization dawning on me. He nodded slowly. "They can't afford to let you talk." My entire world tilted on its axis. I wasn't a hostage taken in an act of war. I was a loose end, a witness to a crime so vast and profane I couldn't even comprehend it. And the man sitting across from me, the savage who had taken me, he hadn't kidnapped me. He had saved my life. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the weight of my father's betrayal and the terrifying truth of my situation. I was trapped between two worlds, hunted by my own people and protected by a man whose family my father had desecrated. "What's your name, my son?" I asked, the question feeling small and inadequate in the face of everything else. He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether I was worthy of the knowledge. "Nashoba," he said. "It means wolf." I repeated the name, tasting it on my tongue. "I'm Evelyn." "I know," he said, and the way he said it sent another shiver through me. Of course, he knew. He knew everything. He stood up, scanning the darkness again. "We ride through the night. There's a ridge we need to cross before sunrise. They'll have a harder time tracking us in the darkness." "You expect me to ride all night?" The words were out before I could stop them, a pathetic echo of the woman I used to be. He just looked at me, then pointed to the crescent moon. "The horse sees better than you do. Trust the horse." "And what if I don't trust you?" I challenged, though the words felt hollow even to me. He paused, then gave a slight shrug that was more eloquent than any speech. "Then stay here. But the coyotes are hungry tonight." I sighed. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. We mounted again. This time, when his arms came around me, I didn't flinch. They weren't the arms of a captor anymore. They were the arms of a guardian. We rode for hours, climbing higher into the rocky terrain. The stars were a brilliant, cold fire above us, a canopy of diamonds on black velvet. As we rode, I listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, a strange source of comfort in the vast, dangerous wilderness. Something had shifted between us. Not trust, not yet. But the first fragile threads of an alliance were being woven in the darkness. Just before dawn, we reached the ridge. The air was thin and sharp, and my body ached in places I didn't know I had. When Nashoba helped me down, my legs gave out completely. He caught me easily, holding me for a moment longer than necessary. His touch was firm, steady. Below us, a narrow valley opened up, a secret world hidden from the desert. It was lush with cottonwoods and juniper, a silver ribbon of a stream cutting through its heart. Smoke curled lazily from a handful of shelters scattered among the trees. It was a place of peace, a sanctuary. "This is your home?" I asked, my voice hushed with awe. "One of them," he replied. "We move with the seasons. It keeps us safe." As we descended into the valley, figures emerged from the shelters. Faces turned toward us, their expressions a mixture of relief and suspicion. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, 100 questions in their silent stares. I was an intruder, a contamination from the world that sought to destroy them. An old woman, her posture as straight and unyielding as a spear, approached us. Her gray hair was woven into intricate braids threaded with silver, and her face was a roadmap of time and hardship. Her eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to see right through me, into the lies I'd been told my whole life. Nashoba bowed his head slightly. "Grandmother," he said, his voice laced with a respect that bordered on reverence. She ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on me. "The white snake sheds its skin in our valley again," she said, her voice like stones grinding together. Then switching to a slow, heavily accented English, she added, "This one carries the stink of the Iron Road." "She is a hostage," Nashoba said, his voice quiet but firm. "She keeps us safe for now." The woman, Luda, stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Hostages are like fire. They can keep you warm, or they can burn your home to the ground." She looked me up and down, a withering assessment. "And this one," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone could hear. "This one looks like she is ready to burn." Luda's words hung in the air like poison smoke. The welcome I hadn't expected turned into a wall of cold shoulders and suspicious glares. Nashoba led me to a small, isolated fire pit on the edge of the camp, a clear message to everyone else. "She is with me, but she is not one of us." He gestured for me to sit on a rolled-up hide. I did, my body screaming in protest. I will bring you food, he said, and then he was gone, melting back into the community that saw me as a threat. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time since the ambush, but not for long. A small girl, no older than 5 or 6, with wide, curious eyes and 2 thick braids, peeked out from behind a juniper bush. She watched me, her head tilted, like I was a strange new animal. I tried a small smile. "Hello," I whispered. She didn't respond. She just popped a berry into her mouth, her gaze unwavering. Then, as if she'd seen enough, she turned and darted away. The rejection, even from a child, stung more than I expected. Neshoba returned with a clay bowl filled with a thick stew of beans and corn. It was warm and savory, and I realized I was starving. I ate in silence, stealing glances at him. He sat across the fire, a stone statue, his eyes constantly scanning the camp, the tree line, the sky. He was a guardian, a protector, and the weight of his responsibility was etched on his face. "You fought with the army," I said, the words surprising me as much as him. "As a scout." He didn't look at me. He just stared into the flames. "A long time ago, when I was young enough to believe their treaties were more than just ink on paper." "What changed?" "They ran out of lies," he said simply. The finality in his voice was chilling. This wasn't a man who held out hope for diplomacy. He was a man who had seen the truth, and the truth was war. "My father," I began, then stopped, the words tasting like ash. "He says this land is empty, that no one uses it." Neshoba let out a short, bitter laugh. "Empty. That's their favorite word. It's empty if it doesn't have their fences, their buildings, their flags. They look at this land and see nothing. We look at it and see everything. Our history, our ancestors, our gods." He leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his intense eyes. "Your father's railroad isn't just cutting through dirt and rock, Evelyn. It's cutting through the heart of my people, through our prayers, through our dead." He picked up a stick and drew a line in the dirt. "This is the track." Then he drew smaller marks crossing the line. "These are the graves, hundreds of them. Some of them, some of them were my family." I flinched. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated desecration, was overwhelming. "And the artifacts?" I whispered. "The things he was selling?" Neshoba's jaw tightened. "Charms, pottery, tools buried with our warriors to help them in the next life. To your father, they're curiosities to be sold. To us, they are sacred. They are the souls of our people." He tossed the stick into the fire where it sparked and hissed. "My sister," he said, his voice suddenly thick with a grief that was still raw. "She died 2 winters ago, caught in a blizzard while running from a cavalry patrol. She was 16. She was trying to protect one of our sacred sites from surveyors like your father." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw not a warrior, not a savior, but a man drowning in loss. After she was gone, there was nothing left to lose, nothing left but the fight. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling pitifully small. "You didn't cause her death," he said, but there was no forgiveness in his tone. And that was the problem, wasn't it? I hadn't pulled the trigger. I hadn't signed the treaty. But I had lived in blissful ignorance, benefiting from the very system that was crushing his people. My silence was its own kind of violence. "But I didn't do anything to stop it," I said, the confession tearing from my throat. He didn't reply, but something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of something that wasn't quite understanding, but was no longer cold accusation. As the fire died down, a new tension settled over the camp. A scout, a young man with a streak of white in his black hair, came running from the tree line. He spoke to Neshoba in rapid, hushed Yavapai. Neshoba's body went rigid. He stood, grabbing his rifle. "What is it?" I asked, my heart starting to pound again. "Trackers," he said, his voice a low growl. "2 of them, on the ridge we just crossed." My blood turned to ice. It was the men from the railroad. Ellis, I knew it had to be. "They found us." "They found you," he corrected, his eyes burning into mine. "They followed your trail." The camp erupted in silent, efficient motion. Possessions were bundled, children were gathered, horses were saddled. There was no panic, only a grim, practiced urgency. This was a life they knew all too well, a life on the run. Luda, the old woman, shot me a look of pure venom. "The snake has brought the hunters to our door," she hissed. Neshoba ignored her. He was shouting orders, organizing the retreat. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm. "You ride with me. Stay close." And as we prepared to flee into the darkness once again, a horrible thought took root in my mind. The trackers were good, but were they good enough to find this hidden valley so quickly? Or did they have help? The escape was a nightmare of tangled branches and stumbling horses in the pitch-black night. We moved like ghosts, not a word spoken, only the muffled thud of hooves and the ragged sound of breathing. The two trackers were still out there, shadows haunting our trail, pushing us deeper into the wilderness. Neshoba led us to a place he called the Stone Maw, a labyrinth of narrow canyons where a dozen men could hide from 100. We made a cold camp, no fire allowed, the chill of the high desert seeping into our bones. I huddled under a thin blanket, listening to the wind howl through the rocks, a lonely, mournful sound. The next few days blurred into a grueling routine. Travel by night, hide by day. We ate cold jerky and foraged berries. The suspicion that had greeted me in the valley had now hardened into open resentment. Every time the scouts reported the trackers were still behind us, the glares grew colder. I was a curse, a magnet for the violence they were so desperate to escape. One afternoon, while we were resting in a shallow cave, Luda confronted me. She had a small, intricately carved bird in her hand, its wooden wings spread as if in flight. "This was my granddaughter's," she said, her voice heavy. "The one who died in the snow with Neshoba's sister. She made it herself." She held it out to me. The soldiers who chased them, their leader had red hair, like a fire on his head. My heart stopped. My father's hair was a sandy brown. But there was someone else. Someone whose glance had always lingered a second too long. Corporal Ellis. The pieces slammed together with brutal force. Ellis wasn't just a soldier. He was a company man. The railroad paid him to protect their interests. He had been there when Neshoba's sister died. He was the one leading the trackers now. This wasn't just business for him. It was a personal vendetta. "He's the one," I breathed. "Corporal Ellis. He's hunting us." Luda snatched the bird back. "He hunts you, and because of you, he hunts us." That night, the trackers got closer. Too close. A rifle shot echoed through the canyon, and one of the Yavapai men cried out, clutching his leg. They had us pinned. We were trapped in a box canyon with only one way out, and Ellis was sitting right on top of it. Panic, for the first time, began to fray the edges of their discipline. They were warriors, but they were also mothers and fathers and children. They were tired of running. Neshoba gathered the handful of remaining fighters, their faces grim in the moonlight. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll pick us off one by one when the sun rises." "We can't go back the way we came," another warrior said. "Then we go up," Neshoba stated, pointing to the sheer cliff face that formed the back of the canyon. It was a treacherous, near impossible climb, especially in the dark. But it was the only way. As they prepared the ropes, a young warrior named Kyle, the same one who had seemed so hostile to me in the camp, approached Neshoba. They spoke in low, urgent Yavapai. I couldn't understand the words, but I could read the tension in their bodies. Kyle was arguing, pleading. Neshoba was unmovable. Finally, Kale threw his hands up in frustration and stalked away. "What was that about?" I asked Neshoba. He hesitated, his gaze following Kale. "He thinks we should give you to them," he said, his voice flat. "He thinks you are the only thing they want, that if they have you, they will let the rest of us go." The words were like a punch to the gut. I looked over at Kale. He was watching me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pragmatic hatred. He wasn't wrong. I was the reason they were here. "Maybe he's right," I whispered. Neshoba's head snapped around, his eyes blazing. "No, but if it would save your people—" "You are my people now," he interrupted, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "I will not sacrifice one of our own to save the rest. That is not our way." His declaration hung in the air between us, a vow that was both terrifying and thrilling. But as we began the perilous climb, Another, more insidious thought crept into my mind. The trackers were good, but this land was a maze. How did they keep finding us? How did they know which canyon to trap us in? It was as if they knew where we were going before we even did. Unless, unless someone was telling them. We reached the top of the cliff just as the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon. We were exhausted, battered, but we were alive. We had made it. But the sense of victory was short-lived. As we looked back down into the canyon, we saw them. Ellis and his men, emerging from the rocks below. But they weren't alone. Standing with them, pointing up towards our position, was Kyle. The betrayal was so shocking, so absolute, it stole the breath from my lungs. Kyle hadn't been arguing to give me up. He had been trying to stall for time. He had been leading them to us all along. Neshoba let out a sound of pure anguish, a wounded animal's cry. He had trusted Kale. They had all trusted him, and he had sold them for a chance at survival, a deal with the devil. Ellis looked up and saw us. He raised his rifle, a triumphant, cruel smile spreading across his face, and I knew with chilling certainty that this was the end of the line. There was nowhere left to run. The world seemed to slow down. Kale, standing beside Ellis, wouldn't meet our eyes. He just stared at the ground, a traitor consumed by his own bitter bargain. Ellis, on the other hand, savored the moment. His smile was a gash in his sunburnt face. He wasn't just a mercenary. He was a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Nowhere to run, Major's girl," he shouted, his voice echoing off the rock. "It's over." Neshoba pushed me behind him, raising his rifle. The other Yavapai warriors did the same, forming a desperate thin line on the edge of the cliff. They were outnumbered and outgunned. It was a last stand. But then something impossible happened. From the west, another sound. Not gunfire. Hoofbeats. A lot of them. Moving fast. Ellis heard it too. His triumphant smile faltered, replaced by confusion. He spun around, searching for the source. Out of a side canyon, a column of riders appeared. They weren't Yavapai. They were wearing the blue of the U.S. cavalry, and at their head, riding tall and straight, was my father. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he had come to save me. Relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. He had found me. He was here to end this. But the look on his face wasn't one of a worried father. It was cold, hard, and furious. And his men didn't raise their rifles at Ellis. They raised them at us. The trap wasn't just Kale's. It was my father's. He hadn't been searching for me. He had been hunting me. He had used Ellis and his corporate thugs to flush us out, to drive us into a corner where his own soldiers could finish the job. Kyle hadn't betrayed his people to save them. He'd been promised protection by my father, a promise that was likely as empty as all the others. It was all a lie. My father's frantic search, his supposed concern. He wasn't trying to rescue his daughter. He was cleaning up his mess. He needed the artifacts, and he needed to eliminate the only two people who could link him to their theft. Me and Neshoba. "Father!" I screamed, the word tasting like poison. He looked up at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, shame. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the mask of the cold, ambitious Major Langston. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice booming and false. "Stand aside. We are here to rescue you from these savages." "Liar!" I shrieked, my voice breaking. "You sent these men. You're the one who wants us dead." A murmur went through his soldiers. They looked from me to my father, a seed of doubt planted. This wasn't the heroic rescue they'd been led to believe. This was something dirtier. Ellis, realizing he was about to be cut out of his payday and possibly silenced himself, made his move. "Don't listen to her, Major. She's gone native," he yelled, and then he opened fire. Not at us, at my father's men. All hell broke loose. It was a three-way firefight. Ellis's mercenaries against the cavalry, and the Yavapai caught in the crossfire on the cliff above. It was chaos, a whirlwind of bullets and blood and betrayal. Men were falling on all sides. In the midst of the madness, Kale did the one thing no one expected. A stray bullet struck near one of the Yavapai children who had made the climb. Without a thought, Kale threw himself in front of the child, taking a bullet meant for her. He collapsed, his life a final, tragic act of redemption. Neshoba saw his chance. While the soldiers and mercenaries were focused on each other, he grabbed my hand. "Now!" he yelled. We scrambled away from the cliff edge, using the chaos as cover. We had to get out of there, to disappear before the victors, whoever they might be, turned their attention back to us. We were almost to the safety of the rocks when a voice stopped us. "Evelyn!" It was my father. He stood 20 yards away, his pistol raised. The firefight below had mostly died down. It looked like the cavalry had won. Ellis was nowhere to be seen. My father's uniform was torn, his face smeared with grime, but his eyes were clear and focused. On Neshoba. "Step away from him," my father commanded. "It's over. Come home." "My home is with him," I said, stepping in front of Neshoba, shielding him with my own body. "He is not the savage here. You are." My father's face contorted with rage and pain. "I did this for you, for our future. That railroad is our legacy." "It's a legacy built on bones and blood," I shot back. "I want no part of it." "Then you have no part of me," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He shifted his aim slightly, preparing to shoot past me, to kill the man I loved. And in that moment, I finally understood. The naive girl from Boston was gone, burned away in the desert sun. I saw the small pistol Neshoba had taken from my saddlebag tucked into his belt. Before I could even think, my hand darted out and grabbed it. It felt heavier than I remembered. More real. I raised it, my hand surprisingly steady, and aimed it at my own father. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking but clear. He looked at me, at the gun in my hand, and he laughed. A bitter, broken sound. "You won't do it. You're my daughter. You don't have the stomach for it." He raised his own pistol, taking final aim at Neshoba's heart. Time stopped. The desert held its breath. It was him or us, my world or his, my past or my future. I made my choice. I pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was deafening. My father staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face. He looked down at the dark stain spreading across his uniform, then back up at me. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just collapsed into the dust, his legacy turning to ash. The remaining soldiers stared, frozen in disbelief. I had just killed their commanding officer. I had just killed my own father. Neshoba pulled me back, away from the edge, his arm a steel band around me. I didn't resist. The gun fell from my numb fingers. I didn't feel like a murderer. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt free. The war for the land was far from over, but my own war, the war for my soul, had just been won. And the price of victory was everything I had ever been. We melted into the rocks, leaving the soldiers and the bodies and the whole broken world behind. The desert had taken another secret, the biggest one of all. And as we ran, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. The weeks that followed were a blur of survival. We moved south towards the jagged peaks of the Sierra Madre, a land the cavalry maps marked only as unexplored territory. Was a haven. The small band of Yavapai survivors, now numbering less than 20, were broken but not defeated. Luda, the old woman, no longer looked at me with hatred. She looked at me with a kind of weary acceptance. I had bled for her people. I had sacrificed my own blood for theirs. In her eyes, I had finally been cleansed of the world I came from. Neshoba and I rarely spoke of that day on the cliff. There were no words for it, but the unspoken truth of it was the foundation of everything we became. It was a bond forged in blood and fire, stronger than any treaty, more sacred than any vow. He taught me the ways of the desert, how to find water where there was none, how to read the stories in the stars, how to listen to the language of the wind. And I taught him what I could of my world, reading to him from the one book I'd managed to keep, sharing stories of a life that now felt like a dream. We found a hidden valley, sheltered by high canyon walls, with a spring that ran sweet and clear year-round. It was here that we began to rebuild, not just our lives, but a future. The survivors, led by Neshoba, started to plant seeds, to build new shelters, to raise the children who had seen too much death. One evening, as the sun set the sky on fire, Neshoba led me to a circle of ancient standing stones on a high mesa, overlooking our new home. The elders were there, including Luda. They had built a small fire in the center. Luda approached me and placed a necklace of hand-carved juniper berries around my neck. "You have the heart of a Yavapai," she said, her voice soft. "You are one of us now." That night, under a billion stars, Neshoba and I were wed. There was no priest, no church, only the quiet witness of the mountains and the blessings of the people who had become my true family. He took my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I thought you were a weapon sent by my enemy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you were the answer to a prayer I was afraid to speak." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the rough wool of his shirt a comfort against my cheek. "We saved each other," I said. Life in the valley was hard, but it was real. Every sunrise was a gift, every meal a victory. The ghosts of my past still lingered. In the quiet moments, I would see my father's shocked face, feel the weight of the gun in my hand. But it wasn't a memory of guilt. It was a memory of choice. The choice to break free, to become the person I was meant to be, not the one I was raised to be. One day, a year later, a Yavapai scout who had been north returned with news. The official Army report stated that Major Langston and his unit were ambushed and killed by unknown hostile forces. His daughter, Evelyn, was presumed to have perished with them. The railroad company, plagued by scandal and financial ruin after the loss of their artifacts and their key military contact, had abandoned the project. The desert had won. It had swallowed the iron road, and it had swallowed my old life whole. I was officially a ghost, a story told around campfires back east. That evening, I stood with Neshoba on the mesa, watching the children play in the valley below. A new generation was growing up in peace, in a place their enemies would never find. My hand went to my stomach, where the first stirrings of a new life, our child, were beginning to flutter. I had lost a father, but I had gained a family. I had lost a country, but I had found a home. "Do you ever regret it?" Neshoba asked quietly, his eyes searching mine. I thought for a moment, looking at the peaceful valley, at the faces of the people I loved, at the man who was my entire world. "My only regret," I said, turning to face him, "is that I didn't choose this life sooner." He smiled, a true, deep smile that reached his eyes and pulled me close. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the laughter of children and the promise of a future we had made for ourselves. A future written not with ink or steel, but with courage, sacrifice, and love. The lines we draw between good and evil, savage and civilized, are often just stories we tell ourselves to justify our actions. Sometimes, to find justice, you have to burn the old stories to the ground and write a new one in the ashes. If you were captivated by this story of survival and impossible choices, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the dark and mysterious tales we have coming next. And let me know in the comments, what would you have sacrificed for a chance at a true home?